Welcome to class, everyone. I'm Mr. Jennings, and today we will be going over the social issues and populist beliefs during the Gilded Age. Now, that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right in and see where history will take us today. So, beginning, one of the biggest social issues during this time has to do with women. Now, women in the 1890s began to work in factories, ride bikes, be more involved in the fight for suffrage. Suffrage is the right to vote. They were more involved in labor unions as well. Now, many of them also stay with more traditional values that was expected by society, like staying home to care for children and their husbands. And women were prompted by society to also take care of their appearance. Some of these we've made improvements on, others still a bit of expectation on women by society to conform to some of these. We also have some immigrants. Now, most of these are coming from Asia and Southern and Eastern Europe. Now, living and working conditions were very poor for these immigrants. They lived in crowded tenements, just very, very crowded, small spaces, and they attempted to assimilate or um, be involved with their community as much as possible. They wanted to adapt to the American way of life. Sometimes one group would be more successful than the other. We have minorities. So, this is after the Civil War. Slavery is now gone. However, Jim Crow laws were in effect in the South. And so lynching of African Americans became common. Mexican American workers lost land and were forced to work in fields. Native Americans are forced to try and assimilate. They would lose land, and they lose a major battle at Wounded Knee, ending in a massacre of all of the Indians there. And then Asian Americans also work in the fields or on railroad tracks and in mines. The Asian Americans were very important in building the railroad from the West Coast, California, eastward towards New York, Virginia, Massachusetts, those areas. Now, children, a lot of them work in factories instead of attending school. This seems weird by today's standards, but it was very common at this time in the Gilded Age. A lucky few, mostly children who were from very well-to-do families, were able to attend school, and many were left home alone while both parents worked, and working and living conditions in urban areas were particularly unsettling. Working in factories was a very dangerous job. There were a lot of things that children could do in factories that a grown adult could not. A lot of these were very dangerous, and it resulted in quite a few accidents children losing limbs, lives, being permanently disabled, um, and they would work 14-hour days. So if you were not from a wealthy family, you probably dropped out of school to go help make money so that you can have food on the table that night. If you came from a wealthy family, you were going to go and attend school, get a higher education, move higher up in society. We do see the beginning of the middle class. And these are started by men and women who took advantage of the opportunity for college. Many of them work as managers and clerical workers. Most were white and native born. They enjoyed leisure activities, and they also, new companies are started to bring in this growing middle class. Places like Macy's, where they could go and spend that extra money that they were making now that they had better jobs and extra money to spend. Now, we do have some problems concerning farmers in the Gilded Age. The first one is the credit crunch, meaning that farmers were not able to borrow money, which means they can't buy new equipment, they can't buy seeds to plant new crops. They also have a very bad problem of debt. So farmers would borrow supplies on credit from local stores. They would then promise to pay back that money when their crops sold. Now, if something happened and your harvest was not as good as you expected, you would not make enough money selling your crops to pay back credit from those local stores. So many fell behind, couldn't pay, and they had to sign over part ownership of next year's crops. So they keep getting further and further into debt by taking on or being exploited in this system, which was called the crop lien system. We also have higher rates of railroad operators and silo owners, and they charge farmers higher prices than big businesses. You want to ship your harvest from New York to Colorado, it's going to cost you a lot more to put it on a train. Oh, you want to store your crops here in the silo, it's going to cost you a lot more than it would for a large business. And there was also growing competition with the global market. So there were so many breakthroughs with making crops around the world, and it allowed for larger harvests. So crops as a whole are easier to make. You're getting more from each harvest. So the supply is very high. The demand for that has remained steady, and that meant that the prices for each part of a harvest, so like each corn on the cob, would go down in price, meaning that then we get back to the debt system. These lower prices meant crops and harvests that were sold were not enough to cover credit that these farmers had borrowed from local stores. So you see this circle just kind of going around and around, and it just spirals out of control, and farmers are not in a very good way. Here's a better example of how this works. This is the sharecropper cycle of poverty, and this is something that a lot of African Americans fell into. So a sharecropper provided land and seed in exchange for promises the landowner would get half the crop. Now, the sharecropper would buy food, clothing, other items on credit from the landowner's store. The sharecropper would plant and harvest, and when settling up, landowner would say the sharecropper owes more than he has earned. To pay this debt, the sharecropper must promise landowner a greater share of next year's crop. And then we get into this cycle again, as I said, spirals out of control, and these people end up further and further and further into debt. So by the time sharecroppers had shared their crops and paid their debts, they rarely had any money left. They were usually uneducated and could not argue with landowners or merchants who cheated them. And sharecroppers frequently became tied to one plantation, having no choice but to work until their debts were paid. Now, the Populist Party is on the rise, and they have some pretty interesting beliefs for a political party. So, they want greater regulation of businesses. They want national graduated income tax. They want to adopt an 8-hour workday. They want restrictions on immigration. They want election reforms, secret ballots, direct election of senators, term limits for presidents and vice presidents, and they wanted to be giving out free silver. Now, some of these, most notably the direct election of senators and term limits for president and vice president, will become laws, but they become laws after the Populist Party disappears from the public eye. Now, one person who was very influential in this was a man by William Jennings Bryan. He was a 3-term House member from Nebraska, the youngest man to run for president, age 36. He was in the Populist Party. He changed politics by campaigning personally, which was unique for the time. And he got a lot of attention by giving a very famous speech called the Cross of Gold. Um, Basically, he was saying, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." And this speaks to the free silver aspect of the Populist Party beliefs. So, which group includes items related to the Populist Party? So we have Group A, they want regulation on businesses, income tax, political power in the hands of people. And in Group B, we have less regulation of business, emphasis on the gold standard, tax reduction, and political power for farmers. Now, if we just go back a couple slides, look at the Populist Party beliefs, the obvious answer is Group A. They want greater regulations of business, free silver, income taxes, political power in the hands of the people. With that, we have come to the end of today's lesson on social and populist beliefs during the Gilded Age. This is Mr. Jennings. You guys have a good rest of your day.